You're listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. To guide us through the intricacies and intersections of emotions, relationships, and male identity is renowned psychologist, author, and speaker Gunter. This is Inspire Change.
Before I begin the actual podcast, I would like to respectfully acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, who are the traditional custodians of the land on which I work. I would also like to pay my respects to their elders past and present. Welcome everybody to another episode of Inspire Change. So another week's gone by. Hope everybody's well. And if you're not, I'd like to hope that you're on the mend. So it's been a fairly eventful time. People are having a good debate about monarchies and all that sort of jazz. But, you know, the thing that really struck my attention in the last week was an article, and it's about fundamentally a conversation that we should be having more of, but appear not to. And, you know, as everybody out there knows who's following my podcast, one of my passions is all stuff men, masculinity, not patriarchy, but equity, inclusion, cooperation, collaboration. So what am I getting at? Well, what I'm getting at is that we're not having a conversation about what happens when men age. And there was a wonderful article. It could have been bigger, could have been a lot more stuff in it in a way, but it was a good prompt, I think. And it was called "No One is Talking About This. What Happens When Men Age?" Now, I've got a personal investment in this because I've turned 65. I'll be 66 this year. And although I get a relatively good amount of positive feedback about my youthfulness, you know, people saying things like, well, you know, 60 is the new 40, so fundamentally I'm just coming up to 50. The reality is that I've had some experiences that, you know, put the spotlight a little bit on this whole issue about getting older. Now, having worked with men, about men for close to, well, probably 4 decades, I can tell you that this is one of the most vexing topics as a health professional that you can have, on lots of different reasons, for lots of different reasons. So let me just give you a quick summary about the article. I'm not going to go hugely into detail because I want to talk about it from my perspective in a way. So the article discusses the challenges and issues faced by ageing men in our society, including the physical, mental, and emotional aspects of growing older. It highlights how these issues often go unnoticed. And as conversations about ageing tend to focus on women, so not so much on us as men. The article also emphasises the importance of addressing these concerns in order to promote healthy ageing and improve the quality of life for older men. Okay, so there's a whole host in it. Now, one of the things that I think probably the article missed out on was the more sort of, you know, spiritual aspect of what it means to be an older male. I mean, I often refer to myself as a bit of a silverback gorilla, not just about my size, but also about the fact that, you know, I feel privileged to have gotten to this age. I haven't had to endure a lot of hardship, some but not a lot. You know, compared to what I've seen other people go through that I've worked with, I've had a pretty blessed life. So when I work with men, I usually work them through 4 levels. What's happening to you physically, what's happening to you psychologically, which means intellectually and emotionally, what happens to you with regards to your behaviour within the context of society, and then what's happening to you spiritually. And that's really, I don't care really about what religion you have. This is more about your sense of purpose and what meaning, you derive from being human and living. So, a really important topic in my view. One of the things that reinforced for me the whole ageing issue was that when I came out of university, I worked in a high dependency care unit for the elderly. So these were all people who basically had gotten beyond being able to look after themselves. And it was co-ed. There was men and women there. And it was really, really interesting because in those days, as compared to now, we didn't see the number of people with Alzheimer's that we now have in nursing homes. So I saw a whole other area, particularly in terms of, mobility, respiratory problems, cardiac issues. So it was a nice broad thing. Yes, there were people there who had dementia and, Alzheimer's, but there weren't too many. We really didn't have too many. There was one woman who I remember very clearly didn't like me really for some unknown reason. And when I first met her, essentially she threw a chair at me. It was quite astonishing, actually. Very tall Amazon. And she certainly hadn't lost any of her strength. I didn't get hit by the chair. I was quick enough to duck out of the way, but, it could have been quite nasty. Anyway, so let me walk you through what I think is really important to look at. And you really do need to have a conversation about this. So one of the things that we tend not to talk a lot about are the physical changes that we as men experience as we get older. So there's the issue of declining physical strength and stamina. I can attest that. So one of my challenges has been shoulder replacements. Okay, 40-odd years of surfing wore my shoulders out. Very painful for a number of years. And in the end, I went, you know what, I've got to bite the bullet. I've got to do the surgery. Now, it is interesting because, from a couple of reasons, but one in particular was the speed with which my fitness began to decline, both in terms of strength and stamina. So I quickly picked up on that and I started focusing, on going for walks and all that sort of stuff. But, basically had to get out of the gym for a while. And I'm still not able to go out surfing. I'm having a bit of a problem with my right shoulder in terms of it's still quite painful. I'm still haven't got the rotation back again. So swimming overarm is a bit painful, but I can do breaststroke. Okay, so that's one. Another physical change is in appearance. Our hair changes, our skin changes, our body shape changes. Okay, and again, if you got the time, you can actually offset this quite considerably. But again, all of that takes quite a bit of time. Now, the key health issues that I think that we do tend to talk about are prostate problems. That really gets rolled out quite heavily. The other one is about heart health, and then to some degree osteoporosis, but we still can consider that more in relationship to women than we do as men. So when I look at older men, and this is now where it ties in with the psychological and social aspect, men who are in a healthy relationship tend to exercise, diet better, and are more focused on healthcare. Usually because I reckon half the time their partner gives them a kick up the arse and goes, go and do this. I've watched lots of men retire from work and become sedentary. The couch becomes not just their friend, but they become codependent on it. And so glued to their hand now is a remote control, never to part with it. Yeah, really bad stuff. Okay, so let me move into the emotional mental health area. So what are we looking at here? Well, one of the things that we forget is that as men age, we get past 45, 50, quite often we're having to face the loss, either through separation or divorce or death, our partner. And so we experience loneliness. And we often feel some sense of alienation. And with it comes a sense of depression. And so, you know, we really do need to stop and take stock of where we are at with that. Okay, one of the things that we know from primate studies is that, you know, essentially a lot of men get depressed through the loss of status and prestige and their role. Okay, so it's a bit like, you know, primates get depressed when they're pushed off their social perch, right? And we, again, in our culture, have relegated to a psychological illness rather than a reaction to a life event. So the other one is that we really need to get a handle on how we work towards retirement and post-retirement and the whole concept of role changes. You know, our society has some pretty tough expectations of men, you know, the whole thing about the hunter, provider, you know, the support mechanism within the family and, you know, all that sort of stuff. You know, what happens when you can't do that anymore? And I've been in situations where I've had to deal with that with relatively young men, especially if they've been involved in a workplace accident or if they're a returning soldier or if they were involved as a frontline person, you know, fiery or ambulance guys or police where, you know, they're suffering post-traumatic stress disorder from the exposure to critical incidences in their work. So really, really important stuff. Now, again, you know, the question is, do we have enough resources? Do we have enough mental health support for elderly, ageing men? And I venture to say that no, we don't. The other thing that changes as we get older is our relationships. You know, there are shifting dynamics with friends, with family, with spouses. You know, we're struggling with the identity and the social expectations are enormous. And, you know, the next question is, well, okay, so you've lost a partner. What do you do? How do you nurture new relationships and maintaining social connections? And one of the things that I can absolutely attest to is that by and large, we as men are lazy when it comes to making and maintaining friendships, social circles. Even within families, we're often useless. The number of times that I hear men go, oh, just let me check with a social, you know, officer here. What they're talking about is their partner. You know, we delegate this often. Even I've been known to do that from time to time. I don't feel good about it, but it happens, you know. I might be busy. Call my wife. She knows what the schedule's like. So not good. So, you know, is our society actually changing in its expectations and the stereotypes that it fosters? Well, I venture to say no, we're not really. You know, masculinity has, you know, again been driven to a more narcissistic level where it's body beautiful and, you know, we need to be positive and, you know, punching goals and, you know, meeting challenges. I can tell you when you're 70 years old, that doesn't feel too good. It's harder. You might have to get, you know, really involved in doing something, and sometimes you feel like, I just can't be bothered. Right? We also get a bit more cynical at times. You know, we've gone around the, you know, sort of the merry-go-round about, you know, where's our career, what's our, you know, what have we acquired in life, you know, have we got the right car? All those sorts of things become, rather than something that, you know, is aspirational and, you know, is part of our ambition, now gets tedious. You know, there's only so many toys you can own. And even then, you know, are you fit enough to be able to utilise those toys? So one of the things that the article then comes to, and I think this is really, really fundamentally important, is that we've got to open up this conversation more and pull together to support each other. We really, to put it bluntly, fucking ageist in our society. And I see it on social media, on YouTube, in the papers, a couple of wrinkles and people start to mutter about, age. There's a few people who are challenging this, and I think that's fantastic. But ultimately, there is this expectation. So plastic surgeons are making an absolute frigging fortune in trying to, restore people's youth. I can tell you, having seen some of the victims of plastic surgery, they look often quite grotesque, especially if the bloody thing's gone wrong and you've paid a fortune for it. It's not like you can sort of go back to the panel beater and go, just take that panel off and redo it. It didn't quite fit. So, really, our society needs to take a really close look at itself, and especially the media who promotes stuff all for the good of materialism and merchandising. So we need to help men basically get in on the conversation. It's gender bias towards women. We need to put our hand up and go, what's important for me? What's happening for me? Share that with friends. Don't go into denial and become an ostrich and stick your head in the sand. Right? Be open about the challenges. We also need to provide more resources, I think, and certainly, more forums for discussion. And people need to develop some empathy and understanding for the aging process. Rather than getting impatient with the person who's struggling to get up the stairs, give them a hand. Right? Not that difficult. Now, they might turn you down because they're embarrassed about this, but at least offer. Is that lady, who's struggling with that shopping trolley, would she be grateful maybe if you reached out and said that? Let me help you. But you know what? We're more likely to do that towards women than we are towards men, who may be as equally in a hard place to deal with carrying stuff, manoeuvring trolleys, all that sort of thing. Just because he's a male and he's supposedly of the stronger sex or gender doesn't mean anything. So we really need to re-examine all of this. So let's get in on this conversation. Inspire change through bringing the topic to the notice of other people who may be either in denial. I mean, if you're 26-year-old, you're really not going to be thinking about what you're going to be like at 70. Half the time you can't totally relate. But if we had more of an open conversation, I remember when I was 17, around about then, I injured myself in the surf. I pulled a muscle in my shoulder. And I was surfing with an older guy who was like in his early 30s. And as we were coming out of the water, I was complaining about my shoulder hurting and it's really going to put me off in the next couple of days, from surfing. And he told me basically to shut the F up. And I was like startled, what are you doing? He says, you're going to be back in the water in a couple of days. If this happens to me, I'm out of the water for 2 to 3 weeks. And I just reacted to him being a bit short and terse with me. But when I thought about it later, I thought, yeah, you know what? I hadn't thought of that. And then later on in my 20s, when I was working people in aged care, it really came home to me. So, let this podcast be a spark to initiate conversation and raise awareness about the challenges men face as we age. We need to have this dialogue. So I hope this podcast's been useful. Please bring this into the light of day rather than hiding it away in a closet somewhere or in the basement. Because it ain't going to go away. No matter how much people are talking about arresting the aging process, immortality is off the charts. It's not going to happen. And maybe it shouldn't happen. I mean, can you imagine that? living forever? Not everyone's going to be able to afford that for a start. I mean, the politicians are now bitching about how we, need to work longer so that we can support ourselves. So have a think about this. This is a very complex topic that includes ethics, morality, medical issues, psychological issues, psychiatric issues. It deserves its place in the sun. So until next time, this is me signing off. And by the way, if you want to get better informed, please subscribe to this podcast. Check out my webpage at www.goodmengreat.com. Check out my book, Making Good Men Great, Surfing a New Masculinity. Hopefully it'll bring some of the issues to your attention and at least create a conversational space. We need to deconstruct the old way of thinking, and the only way to do that is to critically think about what we've got, where we've been, and where we want to go. So until next time, this is me signing off.
Thank you for listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. For more information on the Making Good Men Great movement, or for individual or group coaching sessions with Gunter, visit makinggoodmengreat.com. For inquiries regarding broadcast topics or appearing on the show, email Miranda@noirtainment.com. That's Miranda at NOIRTAINMENT.com.